We're doing a series of lessons on the world evangelization, what has been accomplished, what needs to be done. In this particular lesson, we're calling it Fulfilling the Great Commission, and I want to focus on the part of the Great Commission which has not been completed. We're making good progress, but there still remains a lot of work which needs to be done. In the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 24 and verse 14, Jesus said, "And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come." Now, a couple of things I want to point out in this verse of Scripture. He says the gospel of the kingdom. Now, this is where a lot of people misunderstand what he was talking about. He's not talking about the church here. No, the church is a part of it, but the kingdom is greater than the church. The kingdom of God is what God is doing all over the world, and not only on planet Earth, also in heaven. Everything that God is doing, past, present, future, that is the kingdom of God. It will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations. The word nations there is a Greek word, ethnos, which we get our word ethnic, talking about the different people groups. This is what Jesus is saying, that the gospel of the kingdom will be preached to every people group, and then the end will come. Now, as I said, we're making good progress. In fact, this is a statistic that's very encouraging. In 1800, 75% of the world's population had not heard the gospel. 75%, just 200 years ago. But today, fewer than 28% haven't heard. Now, that's good progress. Good progress that we've gone from 75% down to approximately 25%. So good progress has been made. However, there's still many people that have not heard the gospel. At this present time, there are over 7 billion people on planet Earth. 7 billion people. And that means fewer than 2 billion are the unreached, are the people that have not heard the good news. But 2 billion people is a lot of people, and they deserve the good news of Jesus Christ. Now, the question is, where do these people live? Where do they live? Where can we focus our efforts in fulfilling the Great Commission? The majority of them live in what is called the 1040 window. Now, what this is describing is from the 10th latitude to the 40th latitude, from an area that stretches from Africa to Asia. That is the area of the 1040 window, where the majority of these people live that have not heard the gospel. For instance, it's in this area that contains the 10 least evangelized nations of the world. The 10 least evangelized are in the 1040 window. So it only makes sense that to fulfill the Great Commission, that we focus on making sure that those people have the opportunity of hearing the good news of Jesus Christ. It's in this area of the 1040 window that we find 85% of the world's poorest of the poor. I'm going to talk more about this, the financial inequities in our world today, but 85% of that, the poorest of the poor, live in that area of the 1040 window. This area also contains of the countries that are persecuting Christians, and I'm talking about open persecution here, where people are dying for their faith. It's not just somebody doesn't like me, somebody didn't smile at me, or I didn't get a job promotion. No, we're talking about violent persecution, where people are harmed for their faith. 43 out of the top 50 countries that persecute Christians are in this area of the 1040 window. The 1040 window. Now, there's a few exceptions to that. For instance, North Korea. North Korea is, of course, one of the most dangerous places for Christians to be. There's terrible persecution that's against them, and yet they're just outside of that area. They're not a part of the 1040. But out of the worst countries to persecute Christians, 43 of the top 50 nations live there. Now, of the 77% of unreached people groups, I was talking about the ethnos from Matthew 24 and 14, where he said, will be preached to all the nations. We're not talking about political nations here. Because when we talk about political boundaries, those are the boundaries that have been drawn between the different nations, political boundaries. However, the truth of it is, many times people of the same people group live on both sides of those boundaries. And so what I'm talking in this, I'm talking about the people groups that have never heard the gospel, where the majority of them live, 77%. That's almost 4/5 of all these people live in this 1040 window. Now, what all these statistics are telling us is how we need to refocus our attention to fulfilling the Great Commission by reaching the people in the 1040 window. They are the ones that have never heard the gospel. The majority of them never heard one time. A lot of them do not even know what the name Jesus even means. I remember a friend of mine was talking to a gentleman in China, and he asked him the question if he had ever heard of Jesus Christ. And the man thought for a moment and then said, no. Is that something like Coca-Cola? He had heard of Coca-Cola, but he had never heard of Jesus Christ. And so there are millions, actually almost 2 billion people that's in this category of being what we call unreached. They have never heard the gospel presented to them. For instance, 1.3 billion Muslims live in the 1040 window. There's, of course, more Muslims than that spread around the world. It's more like 2 billion or just over 2 billion. But 1.3 of billion Muslims live inside the 1040 window. And so this shows the high importance of making sure that they hear the gospel. Not only do you have what is called the world of Islam, but you've got 900 million Hindus that live here. Of course, the majority of them are in the country of India. You cannot ignore India when you talk about fulfilling the Great Commission, because it's about 1/5 of the world's population is Indian. Over 1 billion Indians in our world. 900 million Hindus live inside the 1040 window. In fact, speaking of India, another interesting statistic is 1/3 of all people groups that have not been reached with the gospel live inside India. And so we cannot ignore India if we are going to focus on fulfilling the Great Commission. God help us to understand the significance of this and why, when we talk about the 1040 window, why that is so important to missiologists, those that are evangelizing the unreached. This is why it is so important that we focus on this part of the world. Now, a good question to ask ourselves is, how can we reach them for Christ? Because the truth of it is, most of us will never personally go to the 1040 window, and nor do I think we ought to go. I do not think that is the solution to our problem, is everybody moving to the 1040 window. However, somebody needs to go, and we need to link arms with them. So let me give you some strategy how we can go about fulfilling the Great Commission by reaching the people of the 1040 window. Here's the first thing that I would suggest. It's what I would call strategic giving. Strategic giving. I will start there. Jesus talked a lot about money, so let me talk a little bit about money here. When you look at the money that is given toward world evangelization, less than 10% of missions giving goes to the 1040 window. Now again, let me make something very clear. I'm not saying that 100% of everything that we give in missions should go to the 1040 window. No. We have international ministries all over the world that are doing a good job of evangelizing the people where they are. Those ministries need our partnership. They need our support, and we need to be involved with them. However, we need to be strategically minded when it comes to giving to make sure that we include ministering to the people in the 1040 window. Because when you look at it, dollar for dollar, the harvest that comes from the 1040 window is the greatest harvest of the unreached, the unevangelized. If we're going to fulfill the Great Commission, we must include giving to the 1040 window to be able to accomplish that, because that's where the majority of them still live. And Jesus has plainly commissioned us, go into all the world, what he called to the ends of the earth. And so this is what we might call the last frontier of fulfilling the Great Commission, is making sure the gospel reaches the 1040 window. So our giving must include ministries that are involved in reaching these people. We must make a strategic decision that our giving is going to include ministries that are a part of that evangelization in that part of the world, the 1040 window. A strategic part of our giving must be involved in giving toward helping these people hear the gospel. I'm so happy that I have been able to partner with and travel among many of these countries and many of these nations. I'm so thankful that we have the Foundation Truth book in so many languages that are a part of reaching people in the 1040 window. I believe it's got to be a part of our thinking. We've got to make a deliberate decision. I'm going to be involved in helping reach these people for Christ, because it is the command of Jesus. Go into all the world, preach the gospel to every creature. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached to all the nations. And so a part of that is strategically giving to ministries in the 1040 window. Now let me talk about a second thing. The second thing I want to focus on is what I'm going to call strategic networking. Strategic networking. Again, I do not believe that God has called all of us to move to the 1040 window. That is not a rational decision. That is not wisdom, and that is not what I'm saying. What I am saying is we must make the decision to partner with ministries that are making a difference in those nations. Now, because of the internet and because of public information, I'm not going to discuss the particular ministries which we have partnered with, but I assure you there are some very fine people that are working in these nations, and they're doing a good job. They deserve our support. They deserve our partnership. They need our prayers. They need to know that there are people that are praying for them in what they are doing, and become spiritual partners with them, link arms with them. So this is a deliberate decision. Not only do we need to be strategically giving to these people, we need a strategic partnership with them. Now here's what I mean by this. These people that are living in the 1040 window, they have identified over 2,100 unreached people groups. The majority of these, of course, are in this 1040 window. 2,100 unreached people groups. These groups number all the way from 10,000 to 100,000 people. So a lot of people, a lot of groups of people, ethnic groups of people, from 10,000 to 100,000, 2,100 such groups that we find that are still unevangelized. But here's another important statistic. Of these 2,100 unreached people groups, there are 1,600 that have neighboring people groups who have been evangelized, that have a similar culture and language. Let me give you an illustration. The country of India, which contains 1/3 of all the unreached people groups of the world, one of the states of India is called Nagaland. Nagaland, of course, is to the far east. Over 90% of the people of Nagaland profess to be Christian. And there are 10,000 of these people that have devoted themselves to helping share the good news with the Indian people. Now, I believe what we need to do is identify people that live in places like this, that have the similar culture, similar language. They understand the people because they're a part of them, or they're a close neighbor. It's like a cousin in the family. They're related to them. Because of that, they have a lot of inroads. They already know the information of how to speak their language, how to talk to their heart, how to share things that are of importance to these people. These are excellent international ministries which we can strategically link arms with. We can join hands and work together to fulfilling the Great Commission. The Great Commission is not a good idea. It is not the great suggestion. It is a command of our commander-in-chief, Jesus Christ. He is the one that told us to do this. And so if we're going to fulfill the Great Commission, rather than us trying to all move to the 1040 window and reach these people, it would be much wiser to link arms with neighbors, with relatives, with those that have heard the gospel that are in that area. That would be wisdom. Make strategic relationships to help fulfill the Great Commission. That's wisdom. That is wisdom. And if we will do this, then we will be very effective in doing what Jesus has commissioned us to do. It's our responsibility. See, one of the complaints that I hear from time to time about God, how can a good God send anybody to hell that has never heard the gospel? And they want to make a big issue of that. That's a bad question, because the truth is, it's not God's fault. That is our responsibility. We are the ones that are responsible of sharing the good news of Jesus Christ. It's not God's responsibility. He's already commissioned us to do that. And as I mentioned, the gentleman that he had heard of Coca-Cola, but he had never heard of Jesus Christ. What a shame to us as Christians, because Coca-Cola's only been around for about 200 years. And the gospel, we've had that commission over 2,000 years, and yet to fulfill it. So what a shame when there are people that have heard of Coca-Cola, but they've not heard of Jesus Christ. That's not God's fault. That is our fault. And if we're going to fulfill the Great Commission, then we need to make strategic partnerships. Now here, let me give you a third strategy. We not only need strategic giving, strategic partnerships, we need strategic methods. Strategic methods. We've got to change the way that we think in communicating the gospel with the world. The main reason for this, of course, is because of technology. Technology. Technology has shrunk our world. Technology has shrunk our world. It is actually decreasing in size because technology has made it a lot easier to get there. For instance, air travel. Air travel. Air travel has made it possible for us to quickly reach any part of our planet. Get on a plane today and be halfway around the world tomorrow. You can do it. I've done that so many times I can't even count them. Over and over again, I've got on airplanes, and tomorrow I'm totally different part of the world sharing the good news because of technology. Not only is it air travel itself, but what about the internet? The internet has become the super highway of communication to the nations. By the internet, we are able to, and I do this continually, usually with my smartphone. But continually, I will get up and I'm communicating with somebody in Mexico. Then I'm communicating with somebody in Africa. And then I hear a message, somebody sent me an email from Europe. And that's just the way that we live. Our world has become global in sharing information. And so we've got to use the internet to be able to reach the nations. If we're going to fulfill the Great Commission, we must use the internet and technology to do it. See, it's by satellite systems that make communication possible with most parts of the world. I'm talking about going in the most remote areas of the world where you can't even get a cell phone signal. For instance, one of my friends was talking about one of his workers that was in I won't name the particular part of the world, it's just in Africa. I won't name the nation, but for him, this young man had to walk 4 hours climbing the tallest hill in the area. Then there was a tree. He climbed the top of that tree, and he could get a cell phone signal so he could communicate with his workers that were outside his area. But with satellite phones, you can be anywhere in the world, and it sends signals directly to the satellites. And that, of course, is a more expensive way of communication, but it is available to us to be able to communicate anywhere in the world. Smartphones. Oh, I hate it that I have a phone that's smarter than I am. But it's true. My phone will do countless things that I don't even know how to do them. It has all kinds of information stored. It's like a huge computer that I'm carrying in my hand. It's completely changed the way that we communicate. We must use these things to be effective and to fulfill the Great Commission. If we're going to fulfill the Great Commission, we must learn to use technology. Some of my friends, my younger friends, have been telling me for years, you've got to stop thinking about paper and ink and start thinking digitally. Boy, they are so right. They are so right, because that's the way that we have changed in our communication format. That now, I was trying to print everything, and printing is still a good way of communicating. But the most important way of communication now is digital. You must learn to think that, change the way that you do your operations. For instance, let me give you a statistic that I learned many years ago now. Many years ago, I learned that there was a certain country in the world that broke all records for downloads of the Bible. And it came as a shock to me. What country would you think? What country? And actually, for 2 months this went on. They broke all records for electronic downloads of the Bible. Electronic download of the Bible is simply taking off the internet the gospel, the good news, the Bible, the scriptures, and putting it on your computer, your laptop, on your iPhone, your iPad, and you're able to read it electronically, digitally. The country is Saudi Arabia. Who would have ever dreamed that? Who would have ever dreamed it? Because it's against the Bible, against the law to have Bibles in Saudi Arabia. You can't go out and buy a Bible there. But by means of the internet, when it opened up with the communications, Saudi Arabia had created a a vacuum. By not permitting people to have Bibles, they created a vacuum. And so there was this great hunger to receive it. And now there are thousands of people that have the Bible and reading it in Saudi Arabia. See, that's the world in which we live. A world of communication by the internet. And if we do not use these techniques, then we're not going to be able to successfully fulfill the Great Commission. I believe that we are the first generation that has the potential of seeing the completion of the Great Commission in our day and time. We have the potential. I'm not sure whether we will accomplish that. I will see that in my day, but I know that it's going to happen. And one of the driving factors is the electronics, the technology that is taking place. Now, I want to close with a good question, a question that every one of us must answer, and that is, why should anyone hear the gospel twice until everyone has heard it once? That's a good question, a very good question. Why should any of us hear it twice until everybody's heard it once? Jesus said, and this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world to all nations as a witness, and then the end shall come. I want to do my part in helping to fulfill the Great Commission. God, help us to find our place, to do what we can to get this job done. May God help us in our quest of fulfilling the Great Commission. We're looking at the subject of world evangelization, looking at what has been done, what needs to be done to fulfill the Great Commission. This particular lesson I'm calling the World Village. The World Village. And what I want us to do in this lesson is to take the big picture and let's shrink it down to a size that we can understand and makes sense to us. Let's imagine shrinking the world's population down to a village of 100 people. 100 people. And so that's on terms that everybody can grasp and understand. And of course, some of these, the percentages will be off a little bit, but not much. It will be within the talking range, within the ballpark figure here. So let's imagine shrinking our world down to a village of 100 people. This is what our village would look like. First of all, let's talk about population. Population. Who would be the people that would live in our village of 100? Well, Asians. Asians, there are more Asians than anyone else in the world. 57 of our village of 100 would be Asians. Europeans? Europeans would add another 21. 21 Europeans in our village. There would be 8 Africans, and then what is called the Americas, North, Central, and South America, there would be 14 people. So that's the way the ratio would break down. 57 Asians, 21 Europeans, 8 Africans, and 14 Americans. This would be the people that live inside our village of 100 people. Now let's look at it in another way. Let's look at the racial mix-up. How the makeup would be made of the percentages of the different races of people. In our village of 100, 70 of them would be what we call people of color. Now, when we say people of color, which is really a term I'm not that fond of because white is also a color. But we're talking about people that are not white. 70 out of our 100 would be people that are not white. There are a range of colors, of brown, of black, of yellow. There's just a combination there. But the majority of our world would not, it's not our world, but our village of 100 would not be white. So what I'm saying is, it would be a very colorful village made up of all different races of people in our village of 100. Another way we need to look at our village of 100 would be with religion. Religion. What would be the religious makeup of our village of 100? Well, first, Christians. Christians would be the largest percentage. 31 out of our village of 100 would be Christian. That's almost 1/3. Close to 1/3 would be Christian. Muslims would be second. Muslims, approximately 24 out of our village of 100. In other words, 1/4 of that village would be Muslim. The third would be Hindus. Hindus would make up 15. 15 of our village of 100 would be Hindu. And then the remaining, well, I'm going to just call other, because the largest group would be the Buddhist, but then you've got all the different kinds of religions around the world, plus those that are non-religious. The non-religious make about 15. So about half of these 30 would be non-religious, and the other 15 would be just an assortment of all kinds of religions that people worship. And that's their style of worship. So Christians 31, Muslims 24, Hindu 15, and then the other is 30. But here's a statistic I want to drive home. In our village of 100, there would be 28 people that had never one time heard about Jesus Christ. That is our responsibility in fulfilling the Great Commission. If we're going to fulfill the Great Commission, we've got to focus on reaching these 28 that have never heard one time about Jesus Christ. And the question remains, why should anybody hear the gospel twice until everybody has heard it once? Now, another area that I want to talk about is the area of education. Education. In our village of 100, there would be 17 that cannot read or write. 17 that would be illiterate. And then when you look at the overall village, over half of them would only have a very basic education. And by basic, I'm saying, and this is about 30% of them, they only are able to just read and write. They do not have a high school education. It would be what we would call primary school, just a very limited education, barely able to read and write and to function in our world. That would be the makeup of the education. Only 6 out of our village of 100 would have a college degree. Only 6. And so it shows the disproportioned way of educating our world, our village. Everybody doesn't have the same opportunities. It's been one of the things that's been a focus on my life since I began international travels, and that is to help train, equip, and educate Christian leaders all over the world. I'm not interested in people being convinced I'm a good preacher. That's not my goal. My goal is I want them to think their pastor's a good preacher. So if I can improve his education, if I can help him do a better job, his success becomes my success. That's been the very premise from which I have worked for many, many years. Now, one of the statistics I have learned that really interests me is over half, over 50 out of our village of 100 speak either English or Spanish as a primary or secondary language. Over half. Now, that is an amazing statistic, because with English and Spanish, potentially you have the ability to connect and communicate with half of our world. And there's a reason why that I'm doing what I'm doing today, taking everything that I've learned, everything that I've been able to study, and trying to put it on video and then voice that over into Spanish. Because with English and Spanish, half the world becomes my parish. I'm able to reach out to people, billions of people all around the world. Now, let me talk about a fifth area. And this one is a very shocking one to me. In fact, it's very difficult for me to understand even what I understand. It's hard to comprehend this fact of income, the finances, the income of the people in our village of 100 people. In this village of 100, 25 of them would live on $3.20 a day or less. Now, I know that for many people they say that's impossible. You can't do that. Yes, they do it because they live off the land. They only eat what they grow or what they're able to barter and trade with somebody else. That's the way they live. They live off the land. They don't have money. I'm going to talk more about China in a few moments, but China, for instance, in my travels, as I went out into the rural areas of China and discovered that that was the average income for the Chinese farmer, $3 a day. And it's the reason that they're having this massive movement of people moving from the farms into the cities, because in the city, even the low-paying jobs is around $5 a day. And if they could get a good job, they could make like $10 a day. That's 3 times as much as they can make on the farm. And it's why they're having so many people move from the rural areas into the cities. So 25 out of our village of 100 would live on $3.20 a day. Here's another shocking one. 50 out of our world, now that includes the 25, of course, but 50 out of our village of 100 would live on $5.50 a day. Now, I've gone back and researched this. These are the latest statistics I'm able to come up with from the United Nations. They tell us this is the statistics from 2017. And they've got a better handle on it than anybody else in the world. 1/2 the world lives on $5.50 a day. 50 out of our village of 100. Now, those are shocking statistics, because for the majority of us, we cannot even begin to comprehend, can't even comprehend statistics like this. Now, here's another one that we need to try to grasp here in the United States. 40% of the wealth of our village would be in the hands of 6 United States citizens. 40% of the wealth in this village of 100 would be in the hands of 6 United States citizens. Those are shocking statistics, but it shows the responsibility that we have. We do not think of ourselves as being wealthy, rich, affluent, but we are, friend. We are. God has blessed us abundantly. What are we going to do with the finances, the resources that God has given to us? Are we going to do our best to make sure those 28 in our village hear the good news of Jesus Christ? Are we going to share it with them? Or are we going to take our resources and only spend them on ourselves? God help us not to do that. God help us to understand how wealthy we actually are and what a responsibility we have to 1/2 of our village that lives on $5.50 a day. Oh, God, help us to share the good news with them. Now, let me talk about a couple of other areas that tie directly to the financial situation. First one, number 6, nutrition. Nutrition. This is the food that we are eating. In our village of 100, one half of them, 50 of them, would be hungry. Now, by hungry, I'm simply saying they just are not getting everything that they really want to eat. They're never really satisfying their hunger. Now, it's hard for many people to grasp this because of the abundance of food that we have in the Western world, in the United States. We have more food than we actually eat, more than we should. We don't eat that smart because we're eating what we like, what we want, rather than what we need, what we should be eating. But half the world doesn't have that privilege, my friend. One half the world is hungry. And then when you look at those that are the poorest of the poor, 25 in our village of 100 is slowly dying from malnutrition. Those are shocking figures. Shocking figures. 25 in our village of 100 are slowly dying from malnutrition. They're not getting what they need, not just what they want, would like to have, but they're not getting what they need to keep their bodies alive. And it's why so many diseases break out among them, because they're not healthy. They don't have a healthy diet. And because of this, disease is rampant among them. And there becomes these worldwide pandemics of disease that break out in our world. Why? Because 25 in our village are not even getting enough food to keep themselves alive. They are slowly dying from malnutrition. Now let me talk about the seventh area. The seventh area, again, is connected with finances, and that is housing. Where do these people live? Where do they live in our village of 100? The majority of them, in fact, 80 out of our village of 100 lives in what we would call substandard housing. That's a very nice way of saying they live in slums. They live in terrible conditions. This has been one of the most heartbreaking things that I've experienced in my travels around the world, is going into the cities and then going into the mountains among the poorest of the poor. And it's indescribable to see the living conditions where they live, how bad it is. 80 out of the 100 live in substandard housing. For instance, here's a statistic that will make you think. Out of our village of 100, 40 of them have never once used a telephone. 40 out of our village of 100. We think of everybody's got a phone. No, everybody doesn't have a phone. There's 40 of them out of our village of 100 that have never one time used a telephone. And then what about television? What about TVs? Only 25 in our village of 100 would have a television. There's so many of them, approximately 30 of them, that do not even live within range of a TV station. The only way they would ever be able to pick up a TV signal would be by satellite, because they live so far remote from television stations. 30 out of the 100 don't even live in range of a TV. So only 25 even own a TV. Now, this helps us to grasp the world picture, the world in which we live. It's a picture of our world. In our village of 100 people, this is the way that they live and die, because this is the way we live where we are. And we tend to think that this is the way the world is. But no. This is the way the world is right here. But this is not the world in which we live. The world in which we live is a vast, different picture. And so my question comes back to, why should anyone hear about Jesus Christ twice until everybody has heard of him once? See, I wish that we could eradicate all world poverty. That is foolish thinking. It's never going to be done. Jesus said it. The poor you have with you always. And there will always be poor people. I believe we should do what we can to help them. We should do everything that we can to minister to their needs, heal the hurting. That's a part of our responsibility. But there will always be poor people. But there is one thing that we can make sure gets done. And that is that everybody hears the good news of Jesus Christ. Because the truth is, this world is so temporary. It is just a short time, and then our world ends. I'm talking about our natural life. It's over, but there is eternity that is ahead of us. And so, while they're still here, while they're still with us, let's give them the light of Jesus Christ while there's still time. Before they die, they deserve to hear the good news of Christ. Oh, let this become a part of your very being, the very fabric of your soul. I'm going to do what I can to make sure that everybody hears the good news of Jesus Christ. I want to tell a story that radically changed my life. I've been involved in ministry since I was just a boy. I have been preaching full-time ministry now over 50 years that I've been traveling and preaching. But over 30 years ago, about 32 years ago, God began to deal with me about devoting my life, dedicating my life to making sure the gospel goes out to the ends of the earth. And in becoming involved in what we call international ministry, sharing the gospel around the world. I went to Mexico, and I want to tell you the story about a little Mexican boy. Changed my life. I was never the same after that day. We were in central Mexico, in the state of San Luis Potosí. There's a town there that is called Tamazunchale. And it's a mountain town, just a small town, very Mexican. They at that time when I was there 30 years ago, they certainly didn't have any of the modern restaurants, modern hotels and such. The place where we stayed was very, very basic, just a very basic hotel. It was clean, it was comfortable to stay there, but just the basic things of life. In other words, if you got clean sheets and no bugs, and you've got hot water, it's up in the mountains, so it's cool, and it's safe, nobody's going to break in. That was a good place. It was a good place to stay. And but one of the gentlemen that was in our group needed to make a phone call to the U.S. It was very important that he get this message through, and so we had to go to what was called the long distance service. And that was a business that had a connection where they can make international calls. Sometimes it would take hours to get a phone call through. So we got up very early in the morning. We were there when the place just began to open up, and we went in. This was associated with a hardware store, and they had this long distance service as a part of their business. And so he's trying to get his phone call through, and all of a sudden I spotted something over by the wall. It was very dim because the sun had not fully arisen, and so I could hardly tell. At first I thought it was a dog. As I walked closer, I saw it was a little Mexican boy. A little boy asleep on the floor. And of course I'm looking at him. He's probably about 8 years of age. And I turned around to the proprietor, and we began talking with him about the little boy. And he was very awkward about it. He said, yes, he's a little boy from the mountains, a village about 30 minutes from here. He's come to town because his father is dead. his mother is sick. He come looking for work, trying to find work. And he said, I let him sleep in my store so he doesn't have to sleep on the streets. And he seemed, very awkward about it, but he was being kind, trying to protect the little boy. And so we asked him, well, sir, do you mind if we go? We take him, get him something to eat. And the man said, oh, no, that'd be wonderful. That'd be very good if you would take him, and anything you could do to help him. So we wake the little boy up. It was hard waking him up. He was so sound asleep. We got him up, and he's rubbing his eyes, and we start explaining to him, son, we want to help you. We want to do something for you. We'd like to take you and get you something to eat. And are you hungry? And he was. And so he said, okay. So we go out. All they had was sidewalk cafes. They didn't have nice sit-down restaurants and such. You just had little sidewalk tables where you sit down on the side by the sidewalk and order, and they bring the food to you. That's all that they had. So we're sitting at this little sidewalk cafe, and we tell the little boy, anything you want to order, we will pay for it. Buy anything that you want. And he looks up with those big brown eyes, and he says, can I have a cup of coffee? And he said, oh, yes, of course you're going to have a cup of coffee. You can have anything that you want. Just tell us, and we'll order it for you, and we will pay for it. And he looks back, and he says, can I have a piece of bread? Well, by that time, he's got me crying. He just tore me all apart, because such a precious child, such a humble child. And so I called the waitress over, and I ordered everything I could think of. It'd be what we would call steak and eggs. I ordered him the biggest breakfast. They couldn't even get it in an ordinary plate. They had to bring almost like a platter to get all of this food on it. And the little boy sat there and ate every bite. Oh, it broke my heart. We did what we could to help get him some clothes. All of his toes, I'm talking about all of his toes, were sticking out of his little tennis shoes. Rags, just holes all through his clothes. I know that there are people that got so much money that they buy designer clothes. It's got holes in them. This little boy didn't have any designer clothes. He was just a poor little Mexican boy. I left that day with my heart breaking, because I know in Mexico alone, there's 50,000 more just like him in Mexico alone. Not talking about all the other nations of the world. And so I left there that day, my heart breaking, and saying, oh God, give me a bigger heart. A bigger heart. Help me to be able to help children like this, to help minister to their needs. Now, it still touches me very deeply today, because I realize this is our world. This is where we live. We do not live in a world that's full of affluence. We do not live in a world that everybody has all they want to eat. No, we live in a world where people are hungry, where people are dying, where people have never heard the gospel. See, friend, this is our world. It's in our hands. What are we going to do with it? Are we going to share the good news of Jesus Christ? Or are we going to keep it to ourselves? Are we going to link arms with people that are making a difference all around our world? Or are we going to selfishly spend it on ourselves? God help us not to make that mistake, my friend. God has given us the opportunity. Let's make a difference in the world in which we live. It's our world. He has given us the Great Commission. Let's get the job done and do it right.